Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out, and the best way to do so is through email. And with other holidays coming up, or you have show ideas, feel free to reach out to me, and the best way to do so is through email. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Speaker, Spotify, Pandora, and almost all of the podcast platforms, and on YouTube as well. And I greatly appreciate all the feedback that I have been getting with the likes, sharing, and subscribing on there. And continue it out. It would be greatly appreciated. So it's Friday, so I'm focusing in on all of you. So this time I'm going to talk about the origin of the Russian language. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to give brief thoughts before I get into the facts of the matter about the Russian dialect. So, they say that Russian dialect is one of the hardest languages to learn. And then the history behind the Russian culture also is really fascinating with the aspects of how, when you think about the political social structure of it, when you get in the aspects of talking about, for instance, with the Berlin Wall falling in 1989, I was a little bit, I was drooling in my diapers there, but the cultural impact of that is very significant when you learn it, if you choose to learn it, if you want to understand it, and how that relates to what is then versus now and so forth. So that the mere opening of new ideas by literally tearing down a wall really speaks a lot of volumes. And so, I can see some critics saying, that's a reason why we need to, keep our borders open and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a difference between wanting to protect your country versus tearing out of ties that pretty much caused the destruction of certain countries, which was the Berlin Wall. With that said, I'm going to get into the languages here. So here we go. All right, so hold on, I'll be right back. All right, some people might see me as being, I don't know, people are people, but I can't stress enough the aspects of how politics really foment and structure and cultivate a lot with the way in which people see themselves, and this is a manifestation in the aspects of language and language, and then evidently the culture value. So they go hand in hand a lot of times. All right, so let me get into it here. All right, all right. The origin of Russian language can be traced back to Proto-Indo-European language, which was spoken in prehistoric Eurasia between approximately the years of 4,500 and 2,500 BCE. From this ancestral language, the Proto-Slavic language emerged around 500 CE, and as the Slavic tribes separated from other Indonesian European groups and settled in Eastern Europe. So by the 5th century AD, the Proto-Slavic speakers had divided into Western, Eastern, Southern Slavic branches. So the Eastern Slavic group eventually developed into Old East Slavic, also known as Old Russian, which became the linguistic foundation for modern Russian. This is the early form of the language, which was influenced by the old Church of the Slavonic. And again, the aspects of spirituality really implements a lot about the foundation of how people speak and communicate. I mean, the Gutenberg Press, the Gutenberg Bible is a fundamental example of that. The reason why it's so many pictorial images, and it was really something that was preserved throughout. That is something that was treasured and preserved, is because of the implement of most people were illiterate at that time and they could not read. So these pictures really painted the story of what was depicted about the Bible. And spirituality, whether you believe or not believe, is really fundamental in the aspects of how people see things, and then that in itself really is a breeding ground for the forms of languages and words to develop too. All right, so in Old Church, by Old Church Slavic, a linguistic language developed by the Byzantine missionaries and the Cyril and the Methodists in the 9th century. So the Cyrillic alphabet created during this period became the primary writing system for the Eastern Slavic and played a crucial role in the standardization and spread of the language. So the earliest written records of Russian language dates back to the 10th century, with inscriptions such as the one found on the anaphora at the, forgive me for the pronunciation of this, Zienduvo. Over time, the language evolved through various stages, including Middle Russian in the late 1300s, which incorporated elements of Greek, Polish, and German. Again, the influence of other cultures is really prevalent too, of how languages immersion of themselves to be able to adopt, to expand, to be more. People have more cultural awareness of it, global awareness of it too, and that's the impact, and that's what's really fascinating, the aspects of how different cultural values being influenced on a certain language helps to enrich that. So the earliest written records of the Russian language date back to the 10th century, with inscriptions such as one found in a Orpha at the Gendova. Over time, the language evolved through various stages, including Middle Russian in the late 1300s, which incorporated elements from Greek and Polish and Roman, as I said. Going back over that again. So the 18th century saw significant reforms under Peter the Great, who simplified the language and the writing system to promote literacy. And, hold on, I'll be right back. And that's another thing with the aspects of how the reason why certain languages are concise and consistent when initially it was chosen by the higher power in government or so forth, or charging power to say, you know what, let's narrow this down. Let's do something that's really easy for people to digest in order to combat the issue with literacy. And that foresight of that is really something, when you think about this too, in this sense. When you have, which is unfortunate, of the dark side of the Russian culture, when you get in the aspects of KGB, the aspects of communism and all this. There's something to say about a culture that values the aspects of people being very literate, because, and this goes back to the aspects of what I was saying about the Gutenberg Bible and the church. So when people are literate, they're able to think for themselves and see things and understand things. But if there is a cultural consensus to hide this, or to normalize hiding this, then we have a lot of issues in the breaking down of ideologies, of seeing things, having wrong interpretations or the wrong structural values of things. And these things are passed down in a generational problem. And because they can't think for themselves, they can't read for themselves to understand, to know better. And this really reverts itself back to the cultural landscape in which we're facing today. And this is something that I'll just continue on. How is it that, we're supposed to be in the age of advanced technology, we're supposed to be beyond measure, right? But at the same time, there's this divide of people that don't want to embrace that and learn and flourish their mind. And there's a lot of diluting of literacy, or diluting of cultural enlightenment and understanding. And there's something to be said about the aspects of flourishing and nourishing that aspects of literacy, because when you know how to fundamentally speak well, reads well, writes well, that is the development of being a person that is able to adapt and to protect themselves and to assure themselves in the world around you. And so the fact that there are, like this example here with Peter being Peter the king, the monarch, being able, in other countries of this extent here, or to a lesser extent here, being able to understand numbers simply from my point of view, being understand to conform something in order for people to be more literate. That speaks a lot, and with the aspects of understanding the prolific power they can have for their culture. All right, so Peter the Great, that is, who simplified the language, and as I said, with literacy. So further reforms occurred in 1917 and 1918 after the Bolshevik Revolution, which led to the modernization of spelling and the removal of anarchic and polite forms, shaping the Russian language into its current form. So today, Russian is spoken by over 450 million people as their first language, and is one of the 6 official languages in the United States. All right, so I'm going to delve in deeper here. And let me see. So, go right here. So, this is by Verbal Planet, and it is The Evolution of the Russian Language, a Historical Journey. So, it says, the Russian language belonged to the East Slavic branch of the Slavic language family, which has a rich, intricate history. From its earlier beginnings to its modern form, the Russian language has evolved over time, influenced by various linguistic, cultural, and political factors. All right, so I think if you understand the history, really delving deep into history also is a really good marker about the development of language too. So here we go. Let's see what they have to say here about it. So it says, the roots of the Russian language can be traced back to the 19th century when the Slavic tribes settled in the region that is now known as modern-day Russia. So Old East Slavic is known as the Old Russian, which emerged in the earliest record from the language. It is heavily influenced by the Old Church of the Slavonic, a linguistic language developed by, and this goes into more specifics here, by Saints Cyril and Methodius. The Old East Slavic served as the language of the early Russian literature and the cultural expression. So what was going on in the medieval and the middle period of Russia? So during the medieval era, the Russian language underwent substantial changes due to the influence of the Mongol invasion and the subsequent political and cultural interactions of this. This period is known as the Middle Russia, which spanned from the 14th century and all the way to the 17th century. And the Mongol rule brought loan words from Turkish and Mologic language, which became part of the Russian lexicon. Additionally, contacts with neighboring languages such as French and the Baltic languages contributed to the linguistic diversity of the Middle Russian. And that in itself, that is, as I said earlier about it, how other words from other cultures or other nations, how they also develop a language too, is quite interesting. So the Imperial Russia and the standardization of the Russian language. So by that time the 18th and 19th century came around, it marked a period of significant linguistic development in Russia. So the reign of Peter the Great in the 18th century brought European cultural influences, which included reforms aimed at modernizing the Russian language. So under the guidance of the linguistic scholars of the Mikolai Lomonosov, efforts were made to standardize Russian grammar and vocabulary. So the creation of the Russian Academy in the 18th century further contributed to the language and standardization and the embellishment of the literacy, a norm of literacy, as I was stating earlier. So under what was going on under the Soviet era, the modern era of Russia. So by the time the 20th century came around, it witnessed substantial linguistic change in the Russian language. This was influenced by the political and social transformation brought by the Soviet Union. So the Bolshevik Revolution of the 1917 and the subsequent establishment of the Soviet regime had a significant impact on the language. So language policies aimed at promoting literacy and facilitating communication across the vast territory of the Soviet Union resulted in increased literacy rates and the spread of the Russian language among diverse ethnic groups with the Union. So, contemporary Russian and global influences. In the present day, the Russian language continues to evolve while retaining its essential linguistic features. So, modern Russian exhibits a simplified grammatical structure compared to its earlier forms, with the influence from colloquial speech and modern communication technologies. So the language has also been influenced by global developments, with the adaptation of loanwords from English and other international languages to reflect technological advancements and cultural exchange. So what do they have to say about that? How do they conclude? So the history of the Russian language is a testament of its resilience and the adaptability over centuries. From its origin in the Old Slavic to its modern form, the Russian language has evolved throughout cultural, political, and historical transformation. So the standardization efforts during the imperial era and the linguistic impact of the Soviet Union and the influence of the global development have all shaped the contemporary Russian language. So understanding the historical journey of the Russian language helps to appreciate the richness, cultural significance, and the role as it means of communication for millions of people worldwide. All right, so this reaches the end, and I would greatly like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me, and the best way to do so is through email. All right, so tune in, turn up, and definitely take care as we venture on to the new year. Bye-bye.